He thought strength meant saying yes. Yes to favors, yes to burdens, yes to every cry for help that wasn't his own. People called him dependable. They called him strong. He wore those words like armor until they became chains. The story always begins the same way. A man learns that his worth is measured by how much of himself he can give away. And so he starts giving. At first, it feels holy, almost noble. He wakes early, answers every message, fixes every mess. He doesn't realize that each solution carves a small wound, one that never heals because he never stops bleeding. His phone glows long after midnight. Someone needs advice. Someone else needs a ride. Someone needs him to just listen. And he listens. Always. Even when his own head feels like a collapsing room. He was taught that real men endure. Endure pain. Endure silence. Endure everyone's storms while pretending he enjoys the rain. And it works, at first. People smile when he walks in. They say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words feel like warmth. But warmth can burn, too, slowly, invisibly. He starts to forget the sound of his own needs. They whisper, and he lowers the volume. He tells himself, "I'll rest when they're okay. I'll feel later. I'll live after this week." Later becomes never. Every day, he trades pieces of himself for the peace of others. But peace borrowed from exhaustion is debt, not virtue. He becomes the man everyone calls, but no one sees. A ghost built from good intentions. A savior no one remembers saving. He doesn't resent them, not yet. Resentment is too loud for a man who only knows quiet giving. Instead, he tells himself that tiredness is purpose and emptiness is proof. But purpose built on depletion collapses. Every savior has a breaking point. He just doesn't know his yet. He walks home one night, cold wind scraping through the city. He's replaying every favor, every call, every sigh. The world feels heavier than it did a year ago. But he blames gravity, not the weight he chose to carry. A voice deep inside asks, "When was the last time someone asked how you are?" He doesn't answer, because he can't remember. That silence, that's where the fall begins. The world never asked him to carry so much, but it never told him to stop either. He started to confuse expectation with identity. When people said, "You're amazing, I don't know how you do it," he smiled. But inside, he heard a command. Don't stop. Every compliment became a contract. Every thank you became another rope tied around his chest. He mistook appreciation for affection and affection for purpose. Soon, he could predict the pattern. Someone would sigh. He would step forward. They would feel better. He would feel smaller. He told himself this was strength. To absorb other people's chaos, to calm their storms, to rebuild what they destroyed. But strength isn't absorbing. It's discerning. And discernment requires distance. He no longer had distance. He lived inside everyone else's emergency. His life became a waiting room for other people's pain. He waited for them to get better, to apologize, to notice. But they didn't. They were too busy surviving themselves. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a man. He saw a collection of promises. He promised his boss he'd stay late. He promised his friend he'd show up. He promised his partner he'd listen, even when he had nothing left to hear. He promised his family he'd be fine. He promised everyone something, except himself. Sleep stopped being rest. It became recovery from existing. Food lost its taste. Music sounded like noise. The things that once colored his world now existed in grayscale. He was doing everything right. He was helping, working, providing, and yet, a quiet question haunted him between tasks. If I'm doing everything right, why do I feel so wrong? He brushed it off. That's what men do. They minimize pain until it looks like endurance. But endurance has a limit, and his was near. The calls kept coming. Can you talk? Can you fix this? Can you just be there? He said yes, even when his silence screamed no. He started to resent his own kindness. Every good deed felt like a small betrayal, not of others, but of himself. He noticed his hands trembling after each favor, his chest tightening before each conversation. It wasn't anxiety, it was rebellion. His body was tired of being currency in other people's peace. He used to walk tall. Now his shoulders curved, as if trying to carry the air itself. Every breath came with a price tag, and yet he smiled. Because that's what saviors do. They pretend they're unbreakable, so no one worries about the cracks. But the cracks were spreading, invisible to others, painfully visible to him. They whispered in his bones, "You're disappearing." Still, he kept showing up, because that's what made him feel alive. Until the day it didn't. It happened quietly, like most endings do. A simple moment when someone asked for help, and for the first time in years, he hesitated. Not because he didn't care, but because the voice inside him whispered louder than the one on the phone, "I can't keep doing this." He didn't say it out loud, not yet. But the seed of defiance was planted. And every man who begins to question his endless giving is already halfway to freedom. He woke one morning to silence. No calls, no messages, no new emergencies. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like being forgotten. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. The room was clean, but his mind wasn't. Every favor, every apology, every compromise, they all echoed back like ghosts, not angry, just tired. He reached for his phone out of habit. Nothing. He realized, for the first time in years, he wasn't needed. And the thought terrified him more than it comforted him. That's when he understood. He hadn't been living for peace. He'd been living for noise, because silence demands reflection, and reflection demands truth. He poured a cup of coffee and couldn't taste it. He looked outside and saw a world that kept moving without his permission, without his participation. And it hurt. The people he helped had drifted away, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. When you teach the world you need nothing, it believes you. He had built a life around being indispensable, and now that no one called, he didn't know who he was. Days passed like mirrors. Each one showed the same reflection, a man performing purpose without feeling it. He went to work. He answered politely. He smiled when he had to. But his eyes, they stopped arriving with him. At night, the walls pressed closer. Not literally, but in that invisible way only the lonely understand. He thought about texting someone. He thought about saying, "I'm not okay." But he didn't. He had a reputation to protect. The strong one, the stable one, the one who always has the words. So he said nothing, and silence answered back with truth. "You're exhausted from being everything except yourself." He closed his eyes and felt his chest tighten. Tears didn't come easily anymore. He had spent too many years being the calm one. Men like him don't explode. They erode, quietly, completely. He tried to remember the last time he felt truly alive. He couldn't. Every memory had responsibility attached. Every joy had a condition. The mirror became his enemy, not because it lied, but because it didn't. It showed him the cost of kindness without boundaries. The price of being everyone's solution is becoming your own problem. He whispered to himself, "I helped everyone. Why do I feel so empty?" The answer came, not as words, but as ache. Because you built your life on what you could give, not on who you could be. He started seeing it everywhere. In the way people texted only when they needed something. In the way conversations ended when he stopped offering advice. In the way love faded the moment he stopped performing devotion. It was never mutual. It was transactional. The world had taken what he freely gave, and when he stopped giving, it simply moved on. He wasn't angry. He was hollow. And hollowness is heavier than rage. He sat one night in that still apartment and let himself say the words he'd been avoiding. I'm tired of being strong. And for the first time in his life, he didn't mean it as weakness. He meant it as honesty. Something inside him cracked open, not the kind of break that destroys, but the kind that lets the light in. He realized strength wasn't about carrying more. It was about knowing when to put things down. He looked around his home, photos, gifts, memories. Every piece of his past was a monument to the man who never rested. He whispered, "Thank you," and began the slow work of setting it all down. That night, he didn't fall asleep. He collapsed into it. And in that collapse, for the first time in years, he wasn't saving anyone. He was just existing. And sometimes, existing is the bravest thing a man can do. He didn't wake up healed. No man does. Healing isn't a sunrise, it's a series of flickering lights in a long tunnel. He still felt tired, still woke before dawn, still reached for his phone, then stopped halfway. The silence no longer frightened him. It intrigued him. He sat there, watching the morning unfold. No messages, no calls, just the sound of his own breath. He hadn't heard it in years. He stood in front of the mirror. Same face, same eyes. But something was different. For the first time, he didn't see a savior. He saw a stranger. A man built from obligations, wearing kindness like a disguise. He had carried everyone's storms and forgotten his own sky. He whispered, "Who are you when no one needs you?" The reflection didn't answer. It waited. And in that waiting, he felt the weight of every silence he had ever filled for others. He realized he had built his life as a response, not a creation. Every decision was a reaction to someone else's chaos. He had become fluent in other people's language and forgotten his own. He traced the lines on his face like a map. Each wrinkle was a border between who he was and who he pretended to be. He smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was tragic in a quiet, holy way. He remembered the boy he once was, the one who believed love meant disappearing. He saw him standing behind the glass, wide-eyed, hopeful, terrified. He said, "I'm sorry I left you here for so long." And for the first time, the boy smiled back. That's the thing about reflection. It doesn't lie, but it waits until you're ready to tell the truth. He began writing again. Not for others, not for applause, for himself. Simple sentences, raw, unedited thoughts. He filled page after page, as if each word reclaimed a piece of himself. I am not infinite. I am not a hero. I am a man learning where I end. He read those lines aloud. They sounded strange but honest. And honesty, he realized, was rarer than strength. He started walking in the evenings. No destination, no music, just motion. Sometimes he'd pass people who looked like him. Tired eyes, good posture, quiet exhaustion. He wanted to stop them and say, "You can put it down." But he knew they wouldn't hear it yet. They were still saving someone. He remembered the night he collapsed into sleep. How peaceful it was to not be anyone's solution. He chased that peace again. Not through others, but through solitude. He turned off his phone for a day, then 2, then 3. The world didn't end. It never does when you leave it briefly. Only your illusions end. He learned that peace doesn't arrive with quiet. Peace arrives when you stop craving noise. He made coffee again. This time, he could taste it. It was bitter. He smiled. Reality always is. He called no one. But when someone called, he didn't rush to answer. He let it ring. He let it stop. He let himself breathe between needs. This was new. A man who didn't exist to be needed, but to exist. He began to build new rituals. not to replace the old ones, but to honor the man who survived them. He read in the mornings, he trained in the afternoons, he wrote at night, small acts of self-respect stacked one atop another until they formed a life. The mirror stopped looking like judgment. It looked like proof that destruction and creation can share the same hands. He didn't hate the man he used to be. He thanked him, because only a man who has lost himself completely can know the value of finding himself again. And as he stood there, watching dawn spill across the glass, he whispered, "I forgive you." The reflection smiled back, and for the first time, he did too. He didn't rebuild his life overnight. He rebuilt it one quiet morning at a time. There was no grand announcement, no applause, no redemption arc, just a man learning to exist again, slowly, intentionally, without guilt. He woke early, but not out of duty, out of desire. Desire to move, to breathe, to live for himself. He trained his body again, not as punishment, but as gratitude. Every repetition whispered, "You're still here." The weights didn't care who he used to be. They only cared that he showed up. And so did he. Discipline felt different now. It wasn't a performance for approval. It was a conversation with his strength. He no longer filled silence with noise. He filled it with presence. He learned that peace is not the absence of sound, but the absence of pretense. People noticed the change. His tone was calmer. His yes meant yes. His no longer needed explanation. Some respected him more. Some missed the old version of him, didn't he? The endlessly available, the always forgiving, the forever patient. He did not blame them. They were attached to the version of him that made their lives easier. But he had outgrown that script. He stopped trying to be understood. Understanding, he realized, was optional. Respect was not. He began to speak with clarity, not apology. When someone asked for too much, he smiled and said, "I trust you to handle that." The words felt like steel wrapped in kindness. Boundaries no longer felt like walls. They felt like architecture, the structure that keeps a life standing. He reconnected with people who valued presence over performance, men who listened without fixing, who spoke without pretending, who understood that brotherhood isn't rescue, it's recognition. Together, they trained, they worked, they built. No one tried to outshine the other. They understood. Real men don't compete for attention. They compete with their own yesterday. He rebuilt his world around rhythm, not reaction. A rhythm of honesty, effort, rest, and respect. He learned that rest is not laziness, it's strategy. That saying no is not rejection, it's alignment. That leaving is not loss, it's clarity. He looked at his reflection again one morning. It looked back, not as judgment, not as doubt, but as partnership. The man in the mirror wasn't asking for rescue anymore. He was asking for consistency. He smiled. Consistency was something he could finally give. He picked up his journal and wrote, "I will no longer trade my peace for connection. I will no longer apologize for existing with standards. I will no longer mistake being needed for being loved." He closed the book. He didn't need to write more. He was already living it. The woman he once loved reached out again. Her message was gentle, nostalgic. She said she missed how safe he made her feel. He read it with a still heart. He smiled, not out of arrogance, but understanding. He knew what she meant. She missed the man who carried her life for her. But that man was gone. And the one who replaced him no longer confuses safety with surrender. He replied simply, "I wish you peace." No longing, no bitterness, just closure. He went for a walk after. The air was cold but clean. He felt the earth under his feet, solid and honest. He remembered how he used to rush everywhere. Now, he let the world move around him. He understood something simple, something ancient. Strength is not about force. It's about presence. It's about standing when others fold, about protecting without possession, about loving without losing yourself. He didn't want to save anyone anymore. He wanted to inspire them to save themselves. That, he decided, was real leadership. And as the sun broke over the horizon, he whispered a final truth. I didn't lose them. I found me. He laughed softly, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer owned him. The savior was gone. The man remained. And that was enough. This is not motivation. This is reflection, the kind that rebuilds you from the inside out.